Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're just going to do a real quick overview of the best champs for each role on 1021. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the stream every night starting around midnight Eastern Standard Time. We usually go till about 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you. And we are constantly putting out more content as well for League as well as some other games. So we do fresh patch notes and tier lists for every patch. We have topical guides like best one trick, how to micro better, how to macro better, roaming guide, dodging guide, how to get through toxicity, how to overcome feeders, all sorts of guides on the channel. So be sure to check those out. And we do cover Total War as well. And we've been doing some other single player games like a sponsored Witcher 3 playthrough and Darkwood as well recently, and we'll have some more coming up soon, so be sure to check all that out. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I did do the support tier list video already, so I'll probably have that linked at the start of the video, so click on that if you want an in-depth look, but I'm just really quickly going to go over the top 5, and I did shuffle this around a little bit after playing for a few days on this patch and trying out a couple of different combinations, so we'll go over that really quickly, and then we'll try to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes on each one of the roles, and we'll cover the top 5 champs. Okay. But Bard, I still think is number one overall for support, and I talk about this all the time. I've been playing him a ton on stream. What it comes down to is he's just very versatile, and he just really doesn't have any bad matchups. I mean, something like Morgana is not great, but against a lot of hard engaged champs, he's going to have some game, right? Or I guess all hard engaged champs, what I'm trying to say, are not good against Morgana. But he's got some game against pretty much everything to some extent, right? So he's ranged, he can harass in the laning phase, he's got a heal, a pretty decent heal for the cost. It's not insane, but it's like 70 mana for about a 60 or 70 heal. But you have to keep in mind that because of his passive, he gets a lot of free mana as well. In the early games, he can take light trades. He can do all-ins with his stun, very powerful stun, ends up being 1 second, can stun 2 different people and goes all the way up to 1.8 as you level it up. So later on in team fights, you can stun 2 different people for about 2 seconds, which is pretty huge. Awesome roaming with the E, and a lot of this meta is all about roaming. So a lot of ADCs, especially some of the more popular ADCs, we'll talk about that in a second, can very easily fall behind in lane, so you have to be able to roam and play around your mid lane or play around your jungle, try to control those early dragons, early scuttles, and things like that. So you really want to have somebody that's mobile, that can run around and make plays, that has that plan B just in case your ADC starts feeding or you get camped bottom. You got to have a backup plan in a lot of situations. And that's why I think that Bard's really good at that. So got good trading early on. He's got some sustain, really good roaming, pretty good CC with his Q, and then he has a very nice ranged engage. So most of my top supports have really good engage, and a lot of that derives from many of the other roles don't have great engage. So if you look at a lot of the mid laners that are strong right now, almost none of them have solid engage. Jungle, there's some, like you've got your Hecarim and your Kayn, but a lot of the popular junglers like Kha'Zix and stuff like that are just not going to have very strong engage. And then the top laners right now, a lot of them aren't going to have great engage either. Stuff like an Ornn, Maokai, things of that nature aren't really doing so hot in solo queue right now. So having that engage from the support role is nice. And that also does allow you to snowball a lot harder early on, right? Either off of engaging on your own lane or roaming and engaging off of other lanes. And it's a very snowball, very fast meta right now. Sorry, I'm not sure. I'm going to turn this down. Why this keeps cranking these messages here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so very good at that. And so his engage is very unique as well because it's ranged. So a lot of the other top engaged champs are melee, and what does... Holy shit. Let me just turn off the phone. I thought I'd turn down... I thought I'd turn down that beeping, but... Anyways, so that means that if your team doesn't follow up, then you just lost a cooldown, right? You didn't lose your life. Versus like with Leona and Nautilus, if you go in and your team doesn't follow up, there's a high chance that you're going to die. Or if you misread the situation... right? If someone wasn't on board with your follow-up, or if you didn't have something warded and an enemy comes out of a bush and counter ganks you or something like that, that can be bad. And in addition to like having a really good engage with his ultimate, it's just extremely versatile if you play him a lot. It's one of the most versatile spells in the games. You can do everything from engaging to saving your towers from a Rift Herald charge to saving your AD carry from a Karthus ult to canceling Jhin from channeling his ult. resetting fights, like being able to work around like a Taric ult, for example. If they have a huge Taric ult and they're trying to engage on your team, you can ult everybody, and then they're stasis for the entire Taric ult, or something like a Kindred ult. You can stasis the Kindred so she doesn't get the heal, I don't believe, when she's in that ult, or anyone else that's in there. So there's just a lot of like funky situations where that ult can come in really handy if you practice it and get proficient at it. And his base stats are pretty high too for an enchanter, right? He's got like 540 base health, pretty good base armor, and you can actually build him somewhat tanky as well. You can get stuff like Dead Man's Plate, which you don't want to get all the time, but it is on the table. It is the highest win rate starting item that he gets, or certainly one of them. And the reason he can get that and a lot of other enchanters don't get that is because he scales so heavily off of movement speed, just because that allows you to run around and get more chimes, which powers up your auto attacks, which also allows you to roam really well, do a lot more upfront damage, allows you to stick in combat and land those auto attacks, so you get that damage out there more because he has very short range. He's only 500 range, so you're probably going to take some hits from things. And his scaling is just not that great overall in terms of AP. So AP items are okay on him, but you're not giving up as much of an opportunity cost to get Deadman's on Bard as you would if you got that on something like Janna, say, where you're choosing not to get Ardent Censor or not to get something like a Mikhail's on Janna, which could be pretty rough to get Deadman's. You're not really giving up that much of an opportunity cost to get a Deadman's on Bard. Items just really aren't amazing on him in general. It's really just his kit, his roaming, his ult, his stun off of his Q. That's what really makes him unique and special. And most of his damage just comes from his chime collection. So AP's okay, but like his ult doesn't have an AP ratio. His E doesn't. His W is very anemic. His Q's not that great. So you don't have a real heavy opportunity cost, so that frees you up to get some more unique type of items like Deadman's, which makes you a tanky ranged like hard CC champion, which is a pretty unique place to be. So I think that Bard's going to be really strong right now. Janna's another one that I've moved up a little bit. I had her on the top 5, but I chose to move her up even more here just because she is really thriving in this environment right now. The number one player overall period on the EU West server right now is a Janna main. So that's kind of reinvigorated a lot of interest in looking at Janna. Why did I get moving data? I don't know. So that is sort of reinvigorating interest in Janna. And a lot of it comes down to just her ability to roam around, to scale really well, and make plays. How am I on this server? The Japanese server. Europe West. I don't know if this thing is going to troll me or what. Okay, here we go. So he's like 200 LP over second place. And someone was asking me, is he duoed a lot? I don't see it unless he's duoed with someone that's not the AD carry. I mean, if you look over here, his most recent games, it doesn't look like duo. He's played 2 with like a couple of different people, but it looks like it's a different AD carry pretty much every time. So I don't feel like he's duoed his way up here, although I'm not 100% about that. But either way, she just provides pretty good lane pressure. You can spam W on people in auto attacks when you have area, and that puts out pretty respectable damage. You can roam around really well, and this is what separates her from a lot of other enchanters out there. She's very fast with her W, so that means that you can get to situations quickly and respond. It means that, especially with her tornado and her ult, if you get caught out in transit, you can actually escape from that a lot of the time, and that's very different from like Sona, Lulu, Soraka, and these other champs where if the jungler catches you out in the river while you're trying to go between like bot and mid lane, for example, then you could get caught out and die, a lot of times. But with Janna, you're probably going to be able to get away. So she's just very slippery. It's hard to get a hold of her. She's really fast, and she provides a lot of really strong buffs for your team. Because her shield is not only like a pretty strong shield in general, it gives a lot of AD, and people forget about that. It gives around 50 AD once you get a couple of AP items. And so it's like giving a free BF sword to either your AD carry or any of the other champions that scale really well off of AD. It's going to make your Kha'Zix hit really hard. It's going to make your Zed hit really hard. It's going to make your Camille hit really hard. So there are a lot of champions out there that benefit very heavily from the AD. So that's really nice. And then you also have that ultimate, which just completely destroys team fights most of the time, right? Especially against a lot of these diver champs. There's a lot of melee champs that are very popular. 4 of the top 5 mid laners that I have listed here that I think are really strong are all melee. Every single jungle that I have mentioned, well, I guess not fiddlesticks, but 4 out of the 5 junglers are melee. In the top lane, 4 out of the 5 top laners that I think are strong are melee. And so almost every role except for AD carry is going to be melee. Even a lot of the supports are melee, right? You've got Nautilus, Leona, Rakan, Pantheon is something people are playing. So Rakan's not technically melee, but he basically is. I mean, come on. So there's a lot of close range stuff, and so being able to push people back and get that displacement to be able to cancel out a lot of that hard engage out there and just heal up for such a massive amount just gives her a huge edge over a lot of other champions out there. So decent early game, not insane, but okay, especially if you're not against other enchanters, right? So she has a hard time against something like a Sona in lane, who's not super popular right now. But other champs that can poke you out really well, like your Xeraths, your Vel'Kozes, Luxes, things like that can be a little tricky because you don't have a heal and your shield's on a long cooldown early on. But if you're against another melee and you're able to spam that W just over and over and over again on them, and you can push them in with your Tornado, just a fully charged Tornado right down the minion line as it comes through, then she's got a lot of really good game out there. So I think she's great, very versatile, really high win rate overall. Aside from just that one guy, being very good on her, she does have one of the highest win rates as support right now. If we look here, it's literally the highest win rate as support right now. So Janna is very strong. Now you might be wondering about Lulu. Why don't I have Lulu on this top 5 list? The main reason is Lulu is very short range, and that can be a little bit rough. It makes you more vulnerable to getting hit by various AoE abilities, getting in range of different engage things out there. There's a lot of potential for misclicks as well. I talked about this on the last video, but you can misclick and accidentally, damage an enemy when you meant to shield an ally, or whimsy an ally when you meant to polymorph an enemy. So a lot of that is very tricky. I know I had some people in the comment section saying, oh, well, you can just use the portraits down in the bottom right to make sure that you don't misclick if you're targeting an ally. It's like, that's true, but then you have to pull your mouse from the middle of the screen all the way down to the bottom right, make the correct click, and then move it all the way back up over here, which is really problematic. I mean, that's why people hotkey the skill ups, right? Like, no one presses the plus skill button in the bottom portion. I mean, at least you shouldn't most of the time, right? Because it takes your mouse away from the main action. You always want your mouse, whenever possible, to be hovering around where your champion is, because that allows you to make those micro movements to dodge skill shots, to attack move, to reposition yourself. You always want your mouse near your character as much as possible. And like the most elite players will have your mouse basically right on top of your character. And that's how they're able to make those very fast movements. So when you're having to pull your mouse to the other side of the screen to try to click on a champ, a portrait, and then pull it all the way back over to move your champion and do everything else, it's not a great solution. So yeah, maybe you have to do that. And yes, there are some hotkeys like target allies only or target champions only and not minions and things like that. But this is just another mess of stuff that you have to deal with as Lulu, right? Which is gonna, either take extra keystrokes in the case of trying to target allies only, or it's gonna take you extra mouse movements in terms of clicking on the portraits. Either way, it's gonna increase the likelihood of mechanical errors. That's rough. So she's short range, mechanical errors. Her ult doesn't scale very well with plus healing and shielding, and it's single target. So if you do have a very powerful single target who's worth protecting on your team, like a Twitch or a Kog'Maw or something like that, this is hyper-scaling champion, you can get Ardent Sensor, then I think that she, can obviously be really good. But a lot of times she's very heavily indexing towards AD carries. Yes, something like Master Yi really likes Lulu as well. But a lot of times that's indexing towards AD carries a lot more than Janna. Whereas Janna's shield, that raw AD, works really well with Assassins, works really well with Bruisers. And like I said, your Zeds, your Talons, Kha'Zix, all of these things would like the bonus AD. They're not going to benefit as much from the attack speed. So she's good. I still think that she is really good in a lot of situations, but that's just why I chose to pick Janna over Lulu. You could make an argument for Lulu over something like Rakan, maybe in the top 5. So she's okay. We'll talk about her a little bit more because I do have her on the mid-tier list here in just a second, but that's my reasoning for Janna over Lulu. Then we'll speed up, so I don't want to spend the whole time rehashing the support tier list over again. But Nautilus, not really a secret here. He has great engage with his hook, really nice fat hitbox, undodgeable ultimate unless someone has his Anya's. Very handy. You can also use that hook to escape if you want. You can't go over walls to engage, which is kind of a bummer, but realistically a lot of times when people want to do that, it's gonna get them into trouble, right? They're chasing people over walls without vision, so that could be a good thing sometimes, that you are sort of stopping yourself from being able to do a bad chase. Right, but the fact that it doesn't go through walls can be a little tricky. His mana cost can be somewhat high if you're spamming your E in lane too much, but you do have the option of spamming it and pushing waves and things like that if you want to. He is a bit squishier than other champs. His base stats are lower than Leona, Braum, Alistar, a lot of these other like big tanks. So he has lower base stats. His defensive steroid with his W is not that great. You don't level that up typically. You max, or you would get it second. You max your E first, then your W second. Versus Leona, you're gonna max out your W first, which is a lot of your damage, but it's also your survivability. So other champs are gonna have more survivability early on, but he just has that versatility. He's got the wave clear, the undodgeable ult. It's also a knock-up, so it cannot be cleansed by QSS. It cannot be cleansed by Mikhail's or the summoner spell cleanse. So it's just really annoying CC to deal with, and you can knock up multiple people in team fights. So he's been one of the best tanks for a couple of years now. I still think he's going to be great. Yes, he has been nerfed a lot. Yes, his damage is a little bit lower than it used to be, but I still think he's very good. That hook also counts as a displacement. So if you have someone trying to dive onto your backline, you have, like a Zac trying to fly in, or a Jarvan trying to flag and drag, or a Rengar trying to jump on your AD carry or whatever, the fact that that Q displaces them, stops their jump, and that is going to be much better peel than something like a Leona, which just sticks to him. So if you try to E that Rengar who's, jumping in on your AD carry, they're still going to land on your AD carry most of the time. Or the Zac who's trying to jump on your backline, you try to E them with Leona, they're still going to hit your backline because it's not a displacement. It's just a route. So anyways, I think that he's going to be very strong and well positioned right now. You are going to get outscaled by the Janna later on, or by Lulu or Soraka or whatever. So you have to try to end the game early, but you've got a lot of opportunities to do that through your hard engage, through your roaming potential, and all that stuff. Okay, I think Rakan is still worth considering. Now, he is weaker in the laning phase, and in general, I prefer champs that are very strong right now in the lane, just because games snowball so hard. It's very important to get those early dragons, scuttles, Rift Herald, and just crack the game open to really abuse those tier users and things like that. But Rakan can engage, off of his W in the laning phase. Like, you can hit your Qs and do pretty well. And he's one of the best scaling engage champs out there, just because he has one of the best engages, period, with his ult plus his W. And your ability to tag multiple people and have such a high probability of hitting multiple people with your CC. But then he also scales like an enchanter, right? He has a very nice shield, maxed out. It's 140, which is a 280 base, and then it has like a 1.6 AP ratio. So very good AP scaling on him. You don't typically get a lot of AP, but you could if you wanted to, right? You could go with Fiends, you could go Ardent Censer. If you get ahead, that's an option. He can also go something like a Zeke's to begin with, and then if your AD carry's fed, if you have like a triple kill Ashe or something like that, then you can go Ardent Censer and give a double on hit buff with the Ardent plus the Zeke's to buff up the Ashe even more. If your Darius is really far ahead and your Olaf's really far ahead, you can go Shirelia's very comfortably second item if you want to. So he's just very flexible with his itemization, very flexible in his playstyle. He can peel, he can engage, and kind of like Bard, a lot of times if you go in for the engage and your team's just not having it, no one follows up, you can always get back out with your E unless you get chain CC'd. So he's a little bit safer on the engage than other people. And just in general, he's super safe. It's very hard to gank him. He can comfortably go deep into their jungle, get wards, rotate, try to make plays in different spots because he can almost always find a way to get away with his W. So overall, I think that Rakan's still going to be pretty strong. And then Leona is the final one that I'll mention. I already talked about her a little bit before. She has some of the best roaming in the game because her R is on such a low cooldown. It's 90-second cooldown base, and that's really one of the main things that separates her from something like Nautilus, is that 90-second cooldown on that versus Nautilus, I think, is 120 on the ultimate. So she can do it more often. She has a longer range with that. I think Nautilus is like 800 or 900 on his R. Her R is like 1100, I believe. Now, it's easier to dodge. Like, you can't actually dodge hers. So that is a thing. But if you have their flash and they have no dash out of it, then you can start from a much further distance. And she can engage through minion waves and through tanks. So in the laning phase, if you're just standing up near the front line, you always have that threat where you can engage on the ADC at any moment. So that creates a lot of a lot of intimidation in the laning phase. You can zone people off of CS. And then later on in the game, people can't body block your hook, right? If they have an enemy Alistar or something else, like a Braum that's sitting there right in front of their AD carry, with a lot of engaged champs, you can't really get through that, right? But Leona can, because it hits the very last target with her E, and her ult can go through anybody. So she does have those things going for her. So she is a lot tankier early on. She does more damage than Nautilus early on. She has a much shorter cooldown than Nautilus, but she's a lot more dangerous. Like, you have to go all the way in. Nautilus meets you halfway. So if the fight starts going south, if you get baited or anything like that, then it's going to be really rough. And she doesn't have any escapes. Nautilus can at least, if you're getting ganked and you're out of position, your hook's off cooldown, you can at least hook a wall and maybe escape. You have your E, you know, while you're running away, which can maybe slow people and buy just that little bit of extra time for your AD carry. So she's pretty bad at escaping. She has no reverse gear, so that can be kind of rough. But overall, I still think she's going to be pretty strong if you want that hard engaged champ. Okay, let's talk about ADCs here. I think that Jhin is probably the best overall ADC. He's even seeing some Worlds play, which is rare. You almost never see Jhin in Worlds. But he just has a lot of utility about him right now, which is very good. So he does a lot of damage early game, even with no items. If you're able to consistently either hit people with that fourth shot or at least intimidate them with the fourth shot off of CS, you've got a lot of bully potential in the lane. Your grenade does pretty respectable damage as well and doubles as very good wave clear. So a lot of times you can push them in and just get free harassment on them at the same time with your Q. This W is very obnoxious. It has a very long root duration. I don't remember exactly how long it is, but I think it can go up to like 2 seconds. Super long range if you're able to hit it as well. So this combos really well with other potential poke type of champions. So if Bard auto attacks somebody and slows them, then you hit them with the root, and then Bard can set up for a stun with his Q. There's just a lot of nasty little combos with him. And he's very fast. Once you get the Boots of Swiftness and you start getting some more crit, your Infinity Edge plus Storm Razor, it is very, very difficult to catch up to him. So he can run, he can kite out a lot of the other diver and assassin type of champions. And just the fact that he does so much upfront damage is very, very good against other types of assassins or squishier types of champs that are getting on him. It's like, yes, is a Fed Katarina probably still going to kill him? Sure. But he's going to have a much higher chance potentially of surviving because he's going to put up so much upfront damage on one of those champs that your teammates might be able to kill her before she's able to kill you, for example. So he's just kind of the king of burst. Scales really well off of 1 and 2 items. Yes, still does have a problem cracking through tanks because he doesn't have the attack speed. He doesn't have percentage damage. His ultimate basically doesn't exist in a team fight. So, you know, he has those types of problems. He can still kite around tanks, but it's going to take a while to crack through them. But fortunately, not a lot of people are playing tanks and a lot of the other roles out there. So I think that positions him really well. So it's just a combination of chain CC with the W, good wave clear with the Q, good upfront burst, good movement. Then you do have that ult, which does have some nice utility too when you're trying to, you know, get those last couple of hits on people, or where you're trying to contribute to dives, right? Where your support and your jungler are trying to dive the enemy, but it's, you know, really not safe for you to go over there. You're too low of health or something like that. You can curtain call and try to make plays that way. So overall, very strong champion, very good with kind of the way that the itemization is shaking out right now. Ashe, still going to be really good. You could put Ashe number 1 potentially. She's just a little bit slower in the early game to do that damage, so it's a bit harder to snowball. But she still has a ton of utility, and frankly, she just has way too much damage for the amount of utility that she's able to bring to the table. Her perma-slow is obnoxious. You're basically never getting away if the fight ever goes south. She's going to run you down. She's going to kill you on ganks. She's a real terror because you're not going to be able to get away from the ganks a lot of the time. She has the arrow that she's famous for, which can start fights really well. It's on a 100-second cooldown. If you hit one of these arrows, a lot of times it's pretty much lights out unless someone has a cleanse. So super, super strong with a lot of the other champs out there. We mentioned earlier with the supports that a lot of the supports have to run CC because other roles aren't running a ton of CC. Well, Ashe is someone who has a ton of CC, so it's very unique from the AD carry position to have somebody that can start a fight that comfortably, especially from such a long distance. And really good range too, so she can poke people, she can land those autos. with her W, with just her 625 auto attack range. Great utility with Hawk Shot as well. Every time that's up, you can just throw it down the jungle, check out the camps, and really easily track the jungle, which helps out your entire team. And pretty good scaling. I mean, once you get Blade the Ruined King plus Hurricane, which I think is probably the best build most of the time. Infinity Edge is a better single item power spike if you're just really far ahead and you just want to completely dumpster them. But Blade the Ruined King plus Hurricane is very good in team fights because each one of those Hurricane bolts is going to apply Blade the Ruined King. So you're going to be able to get triple procs off of that Blade passive. If you've ever wondered why does she get Blade rather than Infinity Edge because she scales so well off of crit, that's why. So Infinity Edge is better for single target isolation kills, but Blade the Ruined King and Hurricane is going to be better for 5v5 team fights where you're going to be hitting 3 people off of your bolts very often. So I think that's good. And this also does give you the lifesteal in the laning phase, which is good if you're, taking some of those light traits against the enemy. And the movement speed is really nice as well. Your ability to steal the movement speed of someone else and kite them out a little bit more is very nice. So yeah, I think Ashe is good. She does a little bit too much damage, especially later on in the game for how much utility she has. I think they're nerfing her some more next patch, but she is very good. You do have to be careful against some all-in champs just because you don't have any dashes or ways to get away from, an assassin jumping on you or something like that, or like a Leona diving you. But you can kite out some of those melee champs that are just trying to run at you very, very well with your W and your auto attack slows. Okay, let's talk about Samira. So Samira is still super strong, probably going to get nerfed a bit more next patch. It is a little bit rough in the laning phase. Now, she is banned a ton, so keep that in mind if you want to try to play her. But once she does get her items, she is very strong. Does just an absolute ton of damage with her R. Has virtually no base damage on her Q from what I'm remembering. But just the fact that you do have basically a wind wall so that you can block any of the hooks or other types of hard engage things. You have a super high damage ultimate. You scale extremely well with both critical strike and lifesteal because your ultimate and your Q, I believe, count as single target lifesteal. So you get 100% off of that, even though they are area of effect. So that's a little weird, but that's how it works. So yeah, she's very strong. Now, early on, it is a little bit rough because she has a shorter range AD carry, and her abilities don't do a lot of base damage, right? It's almost all about just how much AD that she ends up getting. So she does need a couple of items. Really, like one item, she can start going off. But she can be bullied out early on. She has, fairly limited wave clear, short range, all that kind of stuff. But she's very, very good if you do get ahead. So I think that she's a good champ if you get used to her. You have to get used to her ultimate. It's weird. It's always off cooldown, but it does take a while to charge up. So you do want a little bit of a more extended trade. You don't want the fight to be over in like 2 or 3 seconds, or you're probably not going to be able to get your ult off. So that is kind of dicey, but she can be strong. All right, I think Draven is probably the most underappreciated ADC right now. His win rate isn't spectacular, but I still think that he's super strong just because, once again, in this meta, you want to punish, you want to get ahead, you want to dominate early, and I think he's very good, especially with a lot of these hard engaged champs out there, right? When you got your Bard, you got your Nautilus, you got your Leona, all that stuff in the laning phase. He's going to snowball harder than anybody if he gets those kills. So very aggressive, excellent trades early on. Now, yes, his scaling is not as good later on in team fights because he doesn't have any multi-target abilities. He doesn't get Hurricane. Attack speed is not that great on him just because he really wants to hit people super hard with his axes early on. So, I mean, I guess you could argue that, in the mid to late game, Jin's just going to be a better version of that. Jin's just going to have more movement speed, and I think he's going to crit harder than Draven will once he gets all of his crit modifiers going, especially on the 4th shot. But Draven is still going to rule the early game if you can get up and get those trades, right? So if you can just have somebody hold him still for you, get those kills, get that extra gold off of your passive, he's going to be very strong. Now, I think Infinity Edge is probably the best thing to rush, although Bloodthirster is really popular. Yeah, Infinity Edge is the best. For the love of God, do not get Mana Immune. That's something that I meant to mention too as far as AD carries. If you've noticed, none of these are supposed to get Mana Immune. This item is just trash. I did a whole video on it. I've talked about it a lot. We see it every stream. It's a trap. Okay, it's 2,400 gold. It looks like it's a good item. Because you're like, wow, when it gets totally maxed out at 25 or 30 minutes, it's, 200% gold efficient. It's like, yeah, if. a lot of times games are decided by 15 minutes right now in this meta, right? You have to be powerful, you have to take over early. And Draven is the type of champion where you really want to take over early. So you're basically sacrificing the strongest part of Draven's kit in order to scale for like late game, which is where he doesn't do well anyways most of the time. So I think it's just way better just to double down and say, hey, I'm an early game champ. I'm going to try to snowball as hard as I can. Give me that BF sword and let's get some kills, right? So I don't like that build. So you might be saying, but I saw a Korean building that, and you know, he's a good player. It's like, yes, there are certain team comps where you are focusing on a very specific window of power where that can be good in organized play, right? So for example, if you want to go Manamune and then get this Sanguine Blade next, that does allow you to get like a pickaxe into a Serrated Dirk early, which can give you a pretty nice boost in the early game, and then you can finish your Manamune for just a calculated weakness, you know, maybe between like, I don't know, 8 and 12 minutes or so. Say, hey, I'm going to be a little bit weaker for these 4 minutes while I stop off and get Manamune, but then I can turn that Serrated Dirk into a Sanguine Blade and be stronger from, you know, 13 minutes to 17 minutes. So you can have these very specific windows of vulnerability coordinated with your team and say, hey, you know, I know that we're not going to be able to kill this Ezreal Tom Kench bot lane or whatever, and I know that our jungler is going to want to camp top side, so if I'm on weak side anyways, and I just want the best 2-item cheap power spike possible that I can get, and I'm going to farm super well, and I can get this transformed in a Muramana at 20 minutes, you know, maybe I'll get this item, and then we can have a really strong, you know, 2-item power spike so we can contest the 3rd dragon or whatever. Maybe we're just going to give up the first 2 dragons while we scale. You know, stuff like that. Like some really next level, higher order stuff that you're just not going to see in solo queue and YOLO queue, right? And like gold or silver. You're not going to be that coordinated, right? And so what's going to end up happening is you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot a lot of times and just completely give up your early game and get snowballed on. So that's why I don't like that item. So it's not that it can't win. It has a decent win rate, right? It's just that I just don't think that it's playing to the strengths of Draven. So can there be certain circumstances where it's good? Sure. But overall, I just would not want to concede the early game that much. And then Misfortune is the last one that I'll mention here. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on Misfortune. People just forgot about her, man. This champion is still really strong. Like, she scales very well with crit. 2 of her abilities actually crits. Not only her auto attacks, but her Q can crit. And then her ultimate, each one of those waves can crit as well. So it's one of those rare situations where the abilities are very strong with crit and the auto attacks are very strong with crit. The vast majority of champions who get crit, it doesn't impact their abilities at all. It doesn't help them. You know, Ashe gets crit, that her arrow's not doing more damage because of crit, right? Her W's not doing more damage because of crit. So Misfortune kind of has the best of both worlds. And she just brings a surprising amount of utility. She's very fast with her W, so she can rotate around the map. They did buff this back up a few patches ago. So she's very fast. She can rotate to situations. She can get preferable back timings, roam middle, help support your jungle if you get invaded. There's just a lot of really good stuff you can do with her. Push out a wave and then rotate to get back with your team in the mid game. Then you have your E, which is a surprisingly strong slow. It's a 40% slow at level 1, which is pretty nasty when you get caught in that. And that makes it very easy for your support to land a skill shot on them, right? You put that slow on them. Leona is like 100% going to land the stun on you, right, with her R or even her E unless you flash. Nautilus is going to hit the hook. Blitz is going to hit the hook. Bard's going to hit his ult. So, you know, Lux is going to be able to hit her bind or Morgana. It's just extremely dangerous in the early game, having a point-click 40% slow for 2 seconds. But that's what she has, right? I mean, even putting the Make It Rain on somebody, and this has huge range, so it's like 1,000 range. Even putting this on somebody and then channeling your ult on top of them, you're probably going to kill them unless, because your ult's like 1,500 range. So you can put this on them from like 1,000 range away and then ult, and, you know, unless they flash out of it, they're probably dead. So you just have a heck of a lot of damage early on. Very good poke even with double up, right? You just bounce this off the minion wave. Unless they're standing like, you know, 700 units back off the wave, this is probably going to hit them. And just does a tremendous, excuse me, a tremendous amount of damage, especially if a minion's about to die. So great poke early, great utility with the W, with the E. The ultimate does an insane amount of damage. Awesome for 5v5 team fights. And yeah, just really good scaling with the crit items too. You can get the Essence Reaver into Infinity Edge. Really, really strong 2-item spike. So I think that, I mean, Miss Fortune might be, you could probably put her up a little bit. I mean, she's got a really high win rate, but she's almost certainly the most overlooked ADC that's really strong right now. Okay, let's move on to mid. Make sure we get this video done in under an hour. So mid lane, as always, is one of the most versatile lanes out there. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do. I still like Katarina a lot. She did get a slight nerf to her daggers a couple of patches ago, I think, but it really didn't affect her that much, and I said that I really didn't think it was going to. She's still got a 52.5% win rate. I think that may have dropped her down 1%. She might have been at like 53.5%. I can't remember. Actually, does it say like over different patches? 14 days since the last patch. Yeah, it hasn't really mattered. I think it was either, I can't remember, but either way, it doesn't matter. She's still very strong, and part of what makes her really strong is that she has a tremendous single item power spike off a Gunblade. You can snowball really hard, take over games, kind of like, you know, what I was saying is really good with Draven is that, you know, once you get those kills, once you start snowballing, it's very difficult to stop her. Now, some people are taking, I guess, Ignite plus Teleport. I don't know about all that. But yeah, just really good Gunblade. You do have a defensive option too, a Death's Dance. Now I think the Death's Dance build got nerfed pretty hard. Actually, second item is still pretty good. I think they nerfed the AD ratio on her passive, if I'm remembering that correctly. But it's still a decent build, second item, so you don't want to get it first, but like second is still 58%. And why would you do this? Well, she has like AD scaling on most of her abilities. So that's still really good, and it buys you time. So especially when you have Gunblade, you're getting a lot of healing. When you have Ravenous Hunter, you're getting a lot of healing, and a lot of times you'll have Triumph. I think is she on that Dark Harvest or Conqueror? I guess Dark Harvest, but you still get Triumph second, or as a secondary. But that just buys time. So if you get that kill, if you get that reset, then you're going to get the heal from the Triumph, and then you're going to get all the reset on your abilities and just dump your abilities on someone new, and then you're going to get all the healing off of that. So it just buys, just an extra couple of seconds just to get those kills, get your abilities reset, and then start pumping out the damage again to heal through the bleed effect from the Death's Dance. It's just so powerful. So it just makes you really, really hard to kill when you get the healing from Death's Dance combined with Gunblade, with Ravenous Hunter, and you get that damage delay for 3 seconds. Very, very good item. But you can still get just a more traditional, like a Leandri's Torment, which is going to be very strong on her. If you go for double pin early, so let's say you go Gunblade, then Sork Boots, and Oblivion Orb, that can be a good option as well. Now, she does already have on her ultimate Grievous Wounds for 60%, so you're kind of losing out on some value there with Morellonomicon. So I don't know if I would recommend completing that as much early on. It does have a good win rate, but I think even if you go Oblivion Orb, Gunblade, you're probably still better off going either Leandri's Death Cap or Death's Dance. You'll notice that Zanya's is pretty much a lower win rate across the board as a second item. You really don't want to get that item. You're just sacrificing way too much damage. With Katarina, I mean, maybe in some matchups against like Zed or something like that. And then even third item, it's a lower win rate than almost everything except for Morellonomicon. So it's just kind of a trap item across the board. But yeah, snowballs really well, does a ton of damage, great at team fighting, great at isolation kills, great at closing out games when you get a lead. Okay, Echo's another one that this champion just always feels like he's relevant. Like, it's very rare there's an Echo in a game, even where he's from behind, where it just doesn't feel like he's one team fight away from completely taking over. He just brings so much damage and so much utility. Like, he's got good wave clear, this Q, his W gives him a massive shield and can stun people for like 2.25 seconds, so a potential for a massive AoE stun. If you get that, even if you're behind, that can completely win you a team fight later on in the game if you stun like 3 people. So that's super powerful. Great mobility. You know, he's got his double jump off of his E, so he can jump, over walls and get away from stuff. He can jump to dodge a skill shot and then gap close onto somebody else. So an extreme amount of mobility, great shield, awesome utility with the stun, pretty good slow, good AoE damage, and wave clear with his Q. And then, of course, he has his ultimate, which basically gives him a second health bar and can nuke somebody. So that allows him to get out of a lot of situations. He's very good against other assassins for that reason, where he can just ult, get away, lets him take really risky moves that otherwise people would not be able to take, like trying to dive somebody under tower just to get that last couple of hits to take them down, then being able to use your ult to jump back out. So he just got a lot of utility, a lot of perks, while still having enough burst damage to snowball hard and take over by himself. But he's got really good teamfight game, not only with his damage, but with his utility. So Katarina's got good teamfight damage, but she doesn't have the utility, right? She doesn't have any sort of stun. She doesn't have the extra health she can get to. She does have the mobility, but it's harder for her. I don't think she can jump over walls without help. So both pretty good. And he has a very cheap item with Hextech Proto Belt, so 2,500 gold. He can come online, do a lot of damage, matches him perfectly. He can use that to wave clear. He can use that to gap close to do some extra burst damage. So it's just a super strong item on him. And then being able to get that Lich Bane is very nice as well. You have a lot of different abilities on fairly low cooldowns, like your E, like your Q, that you can just sort of spam and get that extra damage. Okay, Fizz is the next one. And Fizz is pretty good because he's great against, if you get good on Fizz, he's really solid against a lot of other kinds of CC out there because of his Playful Trickster. He can, jump over stuff like a Vhagar wall. He can, I believe, use his Playful Trickster to dodge like a Zed Mark. He can dodge a Syndra ult. He can dodge an Ashe arrow. I believe he can... I think he can dodge a Nautilus ult if he times it correctly. The missile might wait for a second for him to land. I'm not 100%. But there's just a lot of stuff he can dodge. And it's extremely difficult to keep him from getting on your back line because he can jump over walls with the Trident too. So he just kind of ignores a lot of stuff, that interactions that people might have with him, and he just gets to land and pretty much one-shot somebody. And if he hits that shark, he has a nice, good engage from a long range with the shark. If he hits it, it's probably death. It's a huge amount of burst damage. But kind of like I was talking about with Bard, if you miss it, it's kind of no harm, no foul. You just lost a cooldown, right? Versus a lot of these other assassins, if you go in with Katarina and stuff goes south, then you're kind of trapped there a lot of the time. It's really hard to get away. And that's another thing, is that he's very safe even during the laning phase. If you get ganked, you can just Playful Trickster away. Unlike, Katarina, it's going to be harder to get away. Echo, it's going to be harder to get away. You can do it, but Fizz is just so safe in a lot of situations. So roams really well, snowballs, but the main thing is just he has high burst damage and he can just ignore a lot of stuff that's going to be able to peel other assassins. So very low cooldown too on that Playful Trickster over time. I mean, I guess not like ultra low, but like 10 seconds on something that is like that good is nice. And then Zed's the other one of the more conspicuous ones. Now, I think he is getting nerfed next patch. So on 22, he's getting nerfed. But right now, it's just a ton of damage. It's very similar to Twitch in the sense that he's going to get on his target. He's very, very difficult to peel off. He's very safe in the laning phase with his shadow. And he just does, he requires a little bit more skill, I think, than Fizz. You do have to land at least a couple of shurikens to kill somebody. If you get the triple shuriken on the ult, they're definitely going to die. But pretty good wave clear with his Q. Energy Champion, doesn't have to build any mana, so he can just itemize, into full-on lethality. Lethality has some of the best builds in the game in terms of different utility items. So you've got Ghost Blade for the extra movement speed, Dust Blade for the extra damage. This thing right here, the Edge of Night, after its rework, is tremendous on those types of champions because now it makes it even harder to CC him. So not only can he dodge a lot of CC with his ultimate, much in the same way that Fizz can dodge it with Playful Trickster, but now, even if you do manage to pin him down with something, he's going to be able to block a piece of it with Edge of Night. So it's very, very annoying to deal with. As someone who plays a lot of Engage or CC supports, very obnoxious. Now, the only reason I have him a little bit lower is because a lot of times if you go Zed, then you're indexing very heavily towards AD, so they might be able to just stack all armor. And if he does fall behind, he doesn't have any sort of utility, right? He doesn't have the stun of Echo. And you're just risking over-indexing towards AD, right? Because if you have like a Hecarim jungle, then you've got a top Fiora, Zed, middle, and then bot lane Ezreal or something like that, the enemy team can just stack all armor, and it's going to be very difficult for you to win. Zhonya's is also extremely good against him, and a lot of people get Zhonya's, so you have to be able to play around that. So that does kind of hard counter, or at least soft counter some of your abilities. Really good Zeds will play around it. they'll figure out how to target people who don't have the Zhonya's. But if they're getting Zhonya's, that also means they're not getting a lot of damage. So that does open up more opportunities for like your bot lane or your top lane to carry if they're getting that Zhonya's. So that can be good. That's one thing, and that's why I don't have like Talon or anyone else on here that's an AD middle, just because I think most of the time mid lane needs to be AP just to make sure that you're not over-indexed towards physical damage. But Zed is just so strong right now that I think, he deserves a spot. And then Lulu is the other one that you're seeing a little bit more. Now, you're seeing her sometimes in top, sometimes in middle. I think mid lane, if you're going to play her in a solo lane, is one of the better spots just because she does work so well against assassins to some extent, which sounds a little weird because she's an enchanter, but she has that ultimate, right, which makes it hard to blow her up. And then she's got the polymorph, she's got a shield, she's got a Q to help push you in constantly. It makes it very difficult for assassins to roam when she's just spamming that Q. So that's all pretty interesting. And then she can get, I saw like a Rod of the Ages build on her, which I thought was pretty interesting. Because if she doesn't die, she's just bringing so much utility to the team. Now, a lot of people are still going to get Athene's Unholy Grail, but she could get Arm Guard early on in those assassin type of matchups, which could be pretty decent. Or she could start going Rod. So Rod does have a lower win rate than other stuff, but she just has options to be a little bit more defensive if you want to be. Now, in general, I don't like a lot of utility mid laners. I've always been a critic of kind of like Zillion and Karma and stuff like that middle. So Lulu, you do have to make sure that the rest of your team is going to be have enough damage that they're worth supporting to some extent, right? So you need to, have at least 2 or 3 other hyper carries on your team in order to make that work. But if you do have that, then she can be very strong. So I think if you're going to play a utility mage mid, then I've kind of substituted her out for Galio. I think Galio is still interesting as well, but I would probably favor Lulu over that to some extent. She does roam decently well with the W later on, but anyways, I think she can be a pretty good counter pick to some of the melee assassin type of champions out there if your team has enough damage to follow up. Okay. Then we'll do jungle here. We only got 13 minutes left, so we got to keep rolling. But Nunu shouldn't be a surprise. Still number 1, I think. I don't believe Pansar Dragon is the number 1 player anymore in North America. I don't remember, but Nunu's still really, really good. He has a lot of ganks early on. First of all, there aren't a lot of tanks, as I mentioned earlier, in the jungle. So being able to play a tank in the jungle is really, really good compositionally. That just allows like your top laner to more comfortably go like pick a carry type of champ, or even your support if your support wants to play an enchanter or a carry champ like a Zyra or a Brand or something like that. That's going to help out your composition a lot. So he's a tank, scales really well, has a lot of CC. Between his W, his big snowball, his slow and his root off of his E, his ultimate, has a lot of abilities to lock down enemies, good high base stats. He has his Q to gain extra health. It's pretty much guaranteed you should win any kind of smite fight, so even, especially in lower elos, if your support or anyone else is not properly trying to block out the enemy jungler if they're alive, you can probably still win the smite fight anyways. If you just combine your Q with your smite, it's like 1700 damage late game, so you should be able to beat anything. Just be careful you don't get CC'd or silenced, because that will stop you from being able to consume. You can still smite through any kind of CC, maybe not suppression. I don't know, but any other kind of CC you can still smite through it, but you can't do that with consume, so be careful with that. But yeah, really good objective control, takes dragons early, very healthy jungle clear. It's really hard to invade and punish him, because if you are trying to hard invade him, he can just go to the opposite side of the map and start ganking it. So it's just a lot of different options with him, and lots of options with his build too. I mean, you've seen everything from kind of like, you can go sort of a proto build early and just go for like harder ganks, harder, snowballing potentially off of that proto belt, or you can go for a more traditional type of route and get something like a Dead Man's Plate just for faster rotations, faster clears, just better scaling later on in the game. Or you can even go kind of the utility route, which is becoming a bit more popular, where you get a Knight's Vow early if you don't have a tank bottom who's going to get it. Or you could even go for a Locket later on in the game to help you out with team fights. You could even go for more damage, something like a Leandri's, right? If your team's just kind of lacking the damage to cut through them and you're surviving a lot of fights pretty well, you can go Leandri's. He scales really well off of AP and HP, and then the slow off of all of your abilities is going to proc that double damage off of Leandri's. So if the enemy team has 2 or 3 tanks for some reason, which is rare, but could happen, Leandri's could be a pretty good move too. So I'm really high on Nunu. I think he's great because, like I said, it's all those things. Tanky, versatile itemization, can gank really well early, is the supreme, champion of smite fights. So super, super strong champion. He's even versatile with his runes. You can go phase rush to help stick to people and guarantee you're going to get that slow a bit more, kind of be that speed demon early. Or if you are the primary tank for your team, you can still go Aftershock, and that's going to be really good, especially if you want to go for a heavier tank build with like a Dead Man's, Thornmail, Spirit Visage, that type of stuff. And they are about the same win rate, right? It's 53.1 for Aftershock and then 53.8 for Phase Rush. So Phase Rush is slightly higher, but not by as much as people might lead you to believe, right? They're both very, very similar. It just depends on what you need for your builds. So yeah, I think Nunu's still going to be really strong. Fiddlesticks is someone who's just kind of going under the radar a lot, but I mean, he's pushing up at 54%. Very good to have that AP option in the jungle, right? Because that's going to unlock if you want to run the AD mid. If someone wants to run Zed or Talon or Lucian or whatever middle, he's going to bring plenty of AP to the table. So that does open up a lot of different options for you. And even if they go AP middle, then you've got 2 AP and usually 2 AD with an AD top, AD bottom. That's a pretty good mixture. And Fiddle just brings a lot to the table. He power farms super well. He can even farm 2 camps at once. He's very healthy. If you get invaded, it is a problem. You do have to run. It's a bit more dangerous than Nunu a lot of times, just because his base stats aren't as high. But he power farms really well. He can take objectives fairly quickly, like Dragon. Not as fast as Nunu, not as fast as Shyvana, but a pretty respectable speed. Once you get to about level 5 or so. His ganks early are a little suspect. They're not as good. You have to kind of just run at people. But he does have a lot of CC. If you actually get there and you've got the Fear, you've got the E, you've got the W, he puts out a ton of damage. And then obviously once you get your R, it's one of the best ganking tools in the game if you get the proper position. A well-timed R can just completely win a game for somebody. And so if you can get ahead, if you can control that vision, with control wards and his passive effigies and things like that, he can just completely wreck everybody. Brings a ton of damage, a lot of CC with the Fear. He has a lot that he brings to the table. So extremely good champion, especially if you're proficient at vision control and sort of predicting enemy pathing and getting those picks, getting those really sneaky engages. He's going to be great. Hecarim's another one who's super popular right now. He did get nerfed a couple of patches ago, but he's still winning pretty well at 52%. A lot of people are still just kind of skipping the Skirmisher, I believe, and they're just going straight to Trinity. So you just end up getting the Hunter's Talisman early, just skip right up to Trinity, then Death's Dance. Expensive items, it takes him a little while to come online, but once he gets this Trinity, it's probably around like 14 or 15 minutes or so in a lot of games. 14 minutes or so. Then that's when he really starts coming online. So I highly recommend, you see the difference here in trying to get Enchantment Cinderhulk first and then getting Trinity. Right, it's like a 4% win rate difference, which is massive. So you always want to make sure you're rushing that Trinity. Do not complete the Stalker's Blade or any of that. Just sit on the Talisman. Go straight to Trinity. He has good ganks, just like Nunu early on. I think Nunu's a little bit better just because Nunu has more CC than Hecarim does. But Hecarim still has fantastic ganks. And he brings a lot more damage to the table later than Nunu. And the fact that he can ult and get on that back line. So he has really, really good flanks and disruption on the back line that's very difficult to peel. So that's really what he brings to the table versus Nunu, like someone can body block that snowball late game. The support tank, the Leona or the Nautilus or whatever can body block the snowball. Hecarim, you're not body blocking his ult. He's going right through everybody and getting on that back line. And he does a lot of burst damage with like Trinity and Death's Dance and things like that. So I think takes him a little bit longer to fully come online than someone like Nunu. Doesn't have as much versatility with his build. He's not as tanky, doesn't have as much CC. But it's that access to the backline and the burst damage that he has that really sets him apart. So I think Hecarim's still going to be pretty good. Kayn, particularly Red Kayn, is still going to be strong. Very fast clear. Pretty good, just sort of sustained tank over time. A lot of disruption. Pretty sneaky, pretty tricky. Kind of like Fizz, where he can just ult somebody, dodge CC, buy a little bit of time, disrupt. It's very hard to peel him off of that backline as well, too. Especially if you're landing those knockups. So pretty good utility for your team. You can spread around that black cleaver to make it easier for your AD carry to carve through people. You heal for a ton. You've got that knock up for AoE CC. So yeah, just overall pretty strong champ. Everyone's pretty familiar with Kayn. Blue Kayn is okay if you can like guaranteed snowball and close out, just because he roams so fast and does so much damage. But he's, you know, if it gets to the later game, once they get the plus healing and shielding, once they get the armor, you know, if they start getting Zhonya's and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot more difficult to kill him. So I just think Red Kayn, he still does a lot of damage. He has more CC. He's harder to kill. You know, having that disruption CC tank running around is very nice when the rest of your team doesn't have tanks. So I still think Red Kayn's going to be a bit better, but Blue Kayn's viable. And then Vi is the last one that I'll mention. Now, I haven't really had Vi in my top 10, but she has been sneaking up a little bit lately, and I think that, once again, just kind of the dearth of hard engaged tanks, being able to bring that in from the jungle role is very nice, especially with how powerful some of the follow-up is, most notably something like Shen on top of a Vi engage, or Camille on top of a Vi engage can be really, really strong. So you want to just go Warrior, Trinity Force. She does clear waves pretty quickly, or clear camps really quickly. She does provide that extra utility off of denting blows as well, so that I think it's denting blows. One of them like reduces armor. Yeah, 20% of the armor, which once again allows a lot of your physical damage champions to do more damage. The Zed, the Jhin, all of that's going to do extra damage off of that armor shred. So that is pretty nice. And then you just have that point-click ult, which is so great, especially against assassins or other types of divers later on. You know, the Kha'Zix is trying to dive on top of your ADC. Vayne's trying to tumble around and get cute and make some outplays. Ezreal's trying to run away. Whatever it is, you just stick to him and you're going to hit him. It's kind of like a Nautilus missile to some extent, right? It's just going to work and you're going to do a lot of damage once you get Trinity Force. So that is pretty nice. And then she can build pretty tanky too. So she does kind of fall off later on in the game if you aren't able to close out. But the fact that she, you know, does decent AoE damage with her denting blows, and that it does apply an armor shred potentially to the whole team, is very nice. So it's not like she falls completely off a cliff. If you look at her win rate here, you know, from like all the way up to 30 minutes, it's still pretty good, right? At like 53, 54%. So that's still solid. But yeah, I mean, she is an early to mid-game champ. She is a level 6, you know, hard snowball champ, but I think that she does that very well if that's what you're in the market for. And I think that that does match up with the meta pretty well right now as well. Okay, last few champs here. Shen, still going to be number 1. He just does way too much damage up near the top. So he can very comfortably duel a lot of people in the top lane, and he has the utility of being able to rotate and basically get a free teleport with a huge shield on top of it. So I just think that that's way too strong right now. Like, he should not be able to duel a lot of the other popular top laners and have the free teleport, but he does. So he's super strong. You just want to go for that Sunfire plus Titanic Hydra build. Gives you some extreme amount of wave clear. Really good burst damage with that Titanic. Getting that attack reset once your Q is empowered just does a tremendous amount of damage. Very good utility too. Like when he shows up, he has the potential for AoE CC with his taunt. He has the Spirit Refuge with the W, which is very good against a lot of other auto-attacking type of champions. So if you ult and you show up on your AD carry and they're in trouble, you can just immediately W, which is gonna prevent the auto-attack damage on him for 2 seconds. So just got a lot of utility, very tanky. Once again, kind of that tankiness is somewhat rare. There are a lot of tank-ish type of champions in the top lane that I think are really strong right now, but he's definitely going to be the most tanky. And he puts out quite a lot of damage to go with it. So overall, overloaded kit, very strong. So I think he's going to be really solid. Darius, nothing much has changed here. If he snowballs, he's extremely oppressive, very difficult. One of the classic, 1v3 type of champions top lane. Huge bleed, ability to catch people with the E. Yes, he can be kited out potentially, but since a lot of these other champions are melee or at least within grab range, that is going to make him very strong. And a lot of these other champs are also, melee, right? You've got your Vi, your Kayn, Hecarim, Nunu. Pretty much all of these except for Lulu are melee. Most of the supports are melee or at least close range. So he has a lot of targets he can grab, and he can destroy squishies as well as tanks pretty comfortably. And then especially with kind of the evolution of him taking like Flash Ghost and the buff to Ghost from a few patches ago, it's extremely difficult to deal with him when he's ghosting, right? Especially if you have like your support is getting a Shirelia's or something to go with it, or you just have anything else that's going to boost up his speed. He's going to be very, very strong. So even off of single item Trinity, he's just going to completely delete people when he starts fight. So very oppressive. Everybody knows this. That's how he has pretty much always been. It's always just been a question of, well, can you kite him? Can you peel him? And right now I think it's really hard to do that with the current state of Ghost and the state of different types of movement speed effects. He's going to be super strong. And in a team fight, obviously, if he gets a kill, just being able to reset and put that bleed on everybody with the Q and get more and more executes off, it just makes him extremely spooky in fights to deal with. So very tanky, puts out a ton of damage. Super strong snowball champ. Okay, Urgot is another one that is coming back into power. Now, they gave him some buffs, I think, fairly recently. There's not that much that's changed as far as like his evolution, right? He's just going for Black Cleaver into Death's Dance, which is pretty good. Death's Dance is a very good new addition to him because it does give him the tankiness that he wants with his shield. But yeah, I mean, just once he gets to level 9, does a lot of shred, applies those Black Cleaver stacks very quickly. More people are going, I guess, for press the attack now instead of conquer. I'm not really sure why, but does add some extra burst damage. Maybe allows him to snowball harder, especially if he's going to take ignite and just go for that all-in kill at level 6. That could be pretty nice. Maybe this Cole is a new addition. 3 life on hit. I'm not sure how that interacts with his W. Maybe there's something OP about that. I don't know if that gets reduced by 66% like other lifesteal effects on his W or not. If it doesn't, if you're just literally getting 3 life every single like machine gun bullet that comes through, I could understand why that would be really OP against minions. So I'm not an Urgot expert. I don't know for sure, but I do know that this guy can be very, very hard to deal with off of those items. So as you can see, he falls off a little bit. Like he's very good off of like 2 items, but then later on when you can get kited and then once people get a bit more armor, maybe he's not that great, but you know, he does snowball super, super hard. So I think that he's a pretty good choice as well. Wukong, still great. Talked about Wukong a lot in the past. He brings a lot to the table now. He was nerfed and people kind of forgot about him for a little bit, but he's still extremely strong, still has a lot of utility, a surprising amount of utility for how much damage he puts out, right? Like his Q crushes armor, kind of like Vi, lowers the armor, not just like in terms of you ignoring the armor, but your whole team gets to ignore that armor, right? So it increases the Z damage, the Gen damage, all that stuff. Your whole team gets bonus damage on anyone that you hit with that Q. And then, of course, when you take Black Cleaver, and it looks like he's not going Black Cleaver as much. It looks like he's going Trinity Force. But if you did want to take Black Cleaver, you could shred the armor of the entire enemy team whenever you spin around off of your ultimate, because each tick of that spin is going to apply Black Cleaver. So I guess people think... Trinity is way stronger for dueling. I don't know. Giving up that 33% shred on the entire enemy team is kind of rough. But either way, still going to be very good. Trinity, Death's Dance, tons of damage. Lots of CC with the knock-up. Lots of tricks you can do with the clone. You can intercept hooks with it. You can fake out different kinds of abilities with it. Like you could eat ash arrows with it and things like that. So good utility with that. Pretty good mobility. He's got the Nimbus Strike for the gap close. And then I think the R can be used twice. I don't remember which one. I thought he had another. Oh, he can use like Q. I don't remember all. Oh, it's the W that gives you like the extra gap close, right? Or is it a movement speed? I can't remember. But he's very mobile now. Does a ton of damage. Got the knock up. Good itemization. Good team utility. Still going to be very strong. So he can 1v1, but he's also great at team fighting. And that's kind of how all of these are. Like a lot of these are very good at dueling top lane, but they can also show up at team fights and bring a lot to the table. And then Kayle is the last one that I'll mention. Now, Kayle might seem a little counterintuitive because I've been talking the whole time about how it's a very early game meta. You need to get on board early and get strong. But Kayle actually is like pretty decent with some of these changes they made. I think they buffed her a couple patches ago. As long as you're not getting tier, remember tier does not exist in your inventory in the game League of Legends. But if you don't get tier, I think that she is pretty good. So more and more people are waking up to just how powerful Gunblade is on her, because that gives her the sustain that she needs early on in the game. It gives her that extra little bit of burst that she's going to need for those trades. That 175 base damage is very nice on a 40-second cooldown. So those trades are great. And then she scales really well with attack damage and ability power. So it's a very good item on her. And then she can also leverage Nasher's Tooth, which is one of the most OP items in the game, at least in cost efficiency. It's about 150% efficient. Not many champs can take advantage of all of those stats. You've got like Azir, maybe a couple more, but Kayle is one of those champs. So very, very strong 2-item power spike off of her. Now I don't know, they did rework her Q, so I'm not entirely sure how this works again. Or was it her W? Maybe her E. Yeah, her E is now free. So you get better trading off of the E. I don't remember exactly how they changed it, but it sounded like they were making her laning better than it was, and so that's always helpful. And then they decreased her ult a long time ago where it doesn't do the true damage, or like her ultimate form, I should say, her level 16. So that's not as strong as it used to be, but I think that her like level 6 to 11 is quite a bit stronger than it used to be, and her laning phase is actually not that bad compared to what it used to be either. So she's pretty strong. I mean, if you look at just kind of how she curves out here, right? Yes, in the first like 15 minutes, it is a little bit rougher if the game closes out. But even starting at 15, she's got a 52%, right? And then once you spike all the way up and get to level 16, then you just kind of go next level, you know, with 55+%. So, and she does bring a lot of utility, right? She's got that extra speed up and heal with your W. She obviously has her ultimate, which is really strong on any kind of engaged champion that wants to go in. You can use it on yourself. You can also use it on your Hecarim that's trying to dive the back line. So you got a lot of utility there. It's basically like a second AD carry that just does huge like AoE burst damage. So very, very difficult to deal with. Good at kiting out a lot of these other melee champions. So she can split, she can team fight, she scales really well, she can sustain through a lot of matchups early on if she doesn't get just like chain ganked. So she is good. So she is a bit riskier. She does, you know, really hit her height at level 16, but it's just the fact that she has that utility, and now she can make it through the laning phase a lot more. And even, you know, like I said, even off of just 1 or 2 items, I've seen some Kayles in games just like totally go off at like level 11, didn't even have to be 16, just because they had Gunblade and they were getting pretty close to completing their Nashers. So she's really, really difficult to deal with. So there are a lot of other champions I didn't mention out there, so I think it's a pretty balanced meta overall. So be sure to check that out. But these are just, you know, my top 5 for each role. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did. And I'll see you next time. Have a good day.